I just finished my round 2 game from Biel, and this was a long one. It was, I think, just about 5 hours, and I finished maybe half hour ago. It is 7:36 p.m., so I'm kind of tired. Round started at 2 p.m., but I'll try and power through this. I was playing a pretty young player by the name of Suvirr Malli, and he is, I think, 13 years old, maybe 14, but young and definitely underrated player. His current FIDE rating is 2094. And coming into this game, I couldn't actually find too many of his games in the database, couldn't find his online accounts, but I found enough recent games to know that he plays a Slav Defense. And that was basically all I needed to decide my opening beforehand. And I actually decided to play a line that I've never played before. First of all, I very rarely play the Queen's Gambit. I usually like to play London if I go for d4 on move 1. But the reason why I went for Queen's Gambit was in this position, I had remembered a very tricky line that I had seen maybe about 3 years ago. It was actually during a collaboration with Grandmaster Aman Hamilton of Chessbra, and we had maybe a 2 or 3 hour collab where we were just going through like cool, tricky opening ideas. And he showed me a cool idea against the Slav, which I figured I would try in this game. Now it starts with a somewhat offbeat move, this move knight to d2. I should mention that white can start with knight f3 and then later play knight d2, but the point is after knight f6, knight f3, bishop f5. It looks like a very normal Slav, but white has delayed this move pawn to e3 for a very tricky reason. Now, in this game, my opponent didn't play bishop f5, and we'll get to what he did play. But there's a really cool trap here, which I want to show, that Aman had shown me years ago, is white can play knight h4, and after the natural bishop to g6, there's queen to b3, hitting b7. And let me just show the database here. The most played move is queen b6, which is usually the most natural move to defend b7. But after queen b6, there's a really cool idea for white to get the advantage. And if you want to try and find it, feel free to pause the video. And what I'll probably do is link the collab with Aman somewhere, maybe down below. Because actually before the game today, I was rewatching the collab. And when Aman showed me the next move for white, I said, wow, maybe at least once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times.
Some sort of like knight h4, bishop here, and you...
Oh.
You end up threatening.
Oh, that's so nice. Oh, wow. Wow.
You end up...
But the wow move is queen h3. With the double idea of, first of all, taking the bishop and having the pin against h-pawn, so that would force f takes g6. But there's another idea of queen c8. So if black's not careful and takes on d4, queen c8 is checkmate. And there's other lines where queen c8 forces queen d8 and then queen takes b7. And white is already much, much better here. So I had told my opponent this after the game, and then he told me that he actually fell for this trap before. So I didn't know that, but it was an interesting tidbit that he was aware of this idea, and that was the reason why he didn't play bishop f5. Now, I do want to note bishop f5 is a perfectly fine move, and after knight h4, the best move for black is bishop e4. And there's a lot of sharp lines that can emerge from this position, which maybe I'll save for another day to share. But let me show what happened in this game. Instead of bishop f5, he played the move pawn to e6. And yeah, I'm hiding notation to avoid spoilers. So after pawn e6, it's a little bit passive for black because now the bishop on c8 is a bit stuck. And here I just continue with a Catalan setup. I go for g3. And after knight d7, bishop g2. Next several moves were very natural, developing moves. And yeah, I was pretty happy with the opening, given that it's super, super solid for white. And I don't have to worry about like the sharp Catalan lines where black can take and try and defend because my knight is already defending the pawn on c4. So here I continue being solid, queen c2. I had the vision in mind of eventually playing like b3, bishop b2, rook d1, and if black kind of waits around, the long-term idea for white is to get this e4 break. But he went for a more kind of direct plan, starting with rook e8, and after b3 he played pawn to e5. So already a lot of tension in the center. Now, I didn't mind this move because I'm able to take on d5, and it's actually a nice transformation for white. At least I think it's a nice transformation, because after he takes back, I take on e5, and then black is left with this isolated queen's pawn, which can be a long-term liability. I do want to mention that if he tries to move e4 here, then there's a nice line. I can take on c6, counterattacking the knight, and after takes, my pawn is a bit further, and this is just bad for black. So we got to this position, and now I'm playing against the IQP on d5. I start with bishop to b2. He plays knight c6. I play pawn e3. Knight c6 did unleash the rook, so I didn't want to mess with the rook potentially taking the e-pawn. And a very common idea in these sort of positions where the opponent has isolated queen's pawn, it's usually very important to control the square directly in front of the pawn. This is my blockading square, and I'm controlling it with my e-pawn, my knight, and my bishop. And if I can control the blockading square, then black can basically never liquidate. And then later, my plan is to put a rook on d1 and eventually put more pieces to attack the pawn. So from here, he plays knight b4, which was a little bit surprising because I just go back to b1. And after knight e4, I kick his knight. So it seemed like he lost a little bit of time. But then he surprised me again with this move, knight a6. I was expecting the knight to go back to c6, but it was an interesting maneuver with the idea of playing knight c7 and then being able to defend the pawn with the knight. Then maybe later the knight can activate via e6. So I continue with pawn b4, and I was very happy with this move because it enables my knight to get into play. So he plays knight c7, I play knight b3, bishop f5, aligning with my queen. Now, I don't move my queen immediately. I attack the bishop on f5, and there's really no tactics black can employ here to exploit my queen because the bishop's hanging. If he tries knight takes g3, I would simply take the bishop, and this would be a very good transformation for white, having two minor pieces for rook and pawn. So he moves back to g6. I play queen a2. He plays rook c8. And I'm still improving. There's a lot of just natural improving moves. So the position essentially played itself for a good portion of this middle game. And then I play knight h4. So hitting the bishop on g6, but also eyeing the f5 square for one of my knights. And here I was dreaming of eventually knight f5 and then orchestrating some kingside attack, especially if my queen goes to a1. I can have up to 3 attackers against the g7 pawn. On top of that, I also have ideas of bishop h3 to just find a different diagonal for the light square bishop and kick away the rook from c8. So at this point, I was feeling really comfortable, and I also had a nice time advantage, so everything seemed to be going well. But he didn't crack easily. He started with bishop h5, hitting the rook. I played rook to d3. In hindsight, I maybe should have considered this move f3, and I did take time, actually. I took about 12 minutes before playing rook d3, and f3 was a consideration. I didn't go for it because it just looks ugly. It seems to weaken the e-pawn, but it does get initiative, and again, perhaps the bishop can find a different diagonal on h3. But after rook d3, he plays bishop to f8. So he's just trying to hold his ground and be as solid as possible. I play rook to c1. So at this point, I'm thinking of playing bishop h3 next to chase a rook away from the c-file, and then maybe someday get a double up and pressure the knight on c7. But here he plays queen d7, which is a useful move, and it's a prophylactic move because it prevents bishop h3. So I play knight to f5, and I'm still trying to just make all my pieces as happy as possible. He plays queen to b5, which caught me a little bit off guard. I wasn't expecting this move, and I pretty quickly played bishop f1, thinking that the queen is just misplaced on b5. But then he plays queen a4, and here I played my next move relatively quickly with just a few minutes of thinking, bishop to h3. And it turns out that this move was actually a big mistake. And I will admit I did look very briefly with Engine after the game, so I am aware that this move was not good. But during the game, I still felt really, really happy here, given that the rook is now under pressure, and it's also tied down to defending the knight on c7. But then from here, he finds a series of just very, very strong and resourceful moves, starting with knight to e6. And this move is a pawn sacrifice because it just abandons the d5 pawn. But I realize it's not so simple for me to just get away with winning the pawn on d5. Because if I take first on c8, he can take, and then if I take with rook, there's a c2 square, which is quite annoying. Either rook c2 or queen c2, and then I have issues with the f2 pawn. And if I take with queen, I think it's a similar story. It just seemed like a mess here. Like there's knight g5 to defend an attack, and then queen c2. So I thought for a little bit, and I tried to just be solid and not let him get too much active play. I played the move queen to a1, which I thought is nice, a nice multi-purpose move. Not only defending the rook, so I'm not allowing him to just take over the c-file, but I'm also creating the battery with a bishop and targeting the g7 pawn. But after I played queen a1, he found an incredibly strong move, which I completely overlooked, this move rook to c2. And even though it seems like I still have like good pieces and it seems like everything should be under control, the big problem for white is this f2 pawn. It's actually a glaring weakness in the position that can't easily be defended. And after he played rook c2, I realized that white is under serious pressure. If I try and play rook f1, he has to move bishop e2. Like all of a sudden, things are just crumbling for white. So what I played in the game was rook takes d5, essentially abandoning my f2 pawn. I should note that if I take first on c2, he would take back, and yeah, there's no good way for me to defend f2, given that my queen is tied down to defending the bishop. So yeah, I took on d5, and then he finds another strong move, queen to b3, which hits the bishop, hits a rook, essentially forces me to take on c2, and after I take back, I still have no good way to defend f2. And I saw this position coming from a distance, and I thought it's still actually very complex, because I have the move bishop to g2, allowing queen f2, and after king h1, it's still equal material. Like we just had a trade of pawns, basically, d5 for f2, and it's still really, really just crazy, given that it seems like white has a lot of attacking potential on the king side, but black also has attacking potential, given that I just lost my f2 pawn, and the knight, bishop, and queen are all swarming around. And to make matters even more crazy, we're both getting pretty low on time, and we're still well before move 40. On move 40, we'll get an extra 50 minutes, but we have 9 more moves to make until the extra time is added. So at this point, I really had a hard time processing what's going on in the position. I tried to take it move by move. He plays knight to d2 here, which I think is another like very strong move. Should note the knight was attacked by the bishop, and it seems like knight d2 is very risky given that the rook's attacking it, and he's just going very deep into my territory. But the point is, after I play bishop c3, hitting the knight, he maneuvers to c4, where now black is pressuring the e-pawn and the a-pawn. And it's actually quite annoying for white to find a useful move in this position. I wanted to exploit the g7 pawn, but black has enough defenders. And I really wanted to play the move knight h6, but after takes, it seems like a good trade for white, but then there's knight g5, and my rook is just sandwiched on the side of the board. It's not the most tasty sandwich for white, so I didn't go for that. And then I spent a long time here trying to figure out what to do. Spent 4 minutes to play queen e1, which was somewhat of a panic move. I think it turned out to be a very big mistake, because after he takes, there's a very strong move, pawn to g6. And it only gets worse here for white, because after knight to d4, black has just more forcing moves. Knight takes e3, hitting my rook and my bishop, and I'm just living on the 30-second increment now. I play rook to d7, he takes on d4, I take back, and then knight to c2. And at this point, I thought I'm just gonna resign within like a move or two. But that didn't happen, because I found at least one ounce of hope in the position, is this move rook to e4. And the point is, after takes, I did lose a piece. I'm down a minor piece and a pawn, but I thought there's still maybe an outside chance that things could get tricky, given that the knight is a bit stuck on e1. But the problem for white is the knight is not trapped. In order to win it, I have to attack it, and I'm a couple moves away with my king, and that's a little bit too slow, because after king to g1, he found a nice move, pawn to g5, and this was move 40, so we both got extra 50 minutes. And I took some time here before playing knight f5, but I did realize that the position will take a miracle to not lose for white, because now he has bishop to f3. Yeah, I was just trying to create any last chance. I played bishop to b1, he played bishop c6, and now he's creating the square for the knight on f3. And after king f2, knight f3. I think what I'll do is zoom through the rest of the game. We'll see that I did try to at least trade pawns. My one hope was to trade all the remaining pawns and then maybe make him display his knowledge of knight and bishop checkmate. But that did not quite happen. He managed to consolidate. I tried to activate my king, but yeah, the two bishops combined with a knight for black are just overpowering. I lost another pawn, and I tried to set up one last trick. After knight d6, I took on a6, given that the pawn was overworked, but winning a pawn like this was just not enough. I actually lost the pawn very soon, because I have no good way to defend my b-pawn. So I took on c6, he takes back, and things are just simplifying very much in black's favor. Yeah, again, my hope was to somehow force a knight and bishop checkmates, but that did not happen. And after knight g7, black's winning the h-pawn, and I threw in the towel. And yeah, it was a tough game. Of course, losing to a lower rated opponent does sting a little bit, but I do want to give my opponent like huge kudos for finding just a series of incredibly strong moves from what I thought was a very difficult position. And yeah, just going back, we can see, I'll show the engine analysis just very briefly. We can see that white was +2. Apparently I had to play queen b3. It was a more accurate move than bishop f1, presumably preventing queen a4 and not having to worry about this eventual rook c2 idea. But after bishop f1, I basically lost my whole advantage. And then after bishop h3, I lost the quality, and already knight e6 is a nearly winning position for black. And I didn't realize it during the game, just how bad it was. And yeah, like he found just a lot of just really strong moves. And I think from this point forward, he did not let his advantage slip. So it was a tough lesson. I think a lot of lessons to take away from this game. Having a solid and comfortable position out of the opening is not enough to win. And even when things are comfortable, it just takes a lot of effort to actually convert the advantage and be aware of the opponent's counterplay. So I am half out of 2, not the best start to the tournament, but there are 8 more rounds to go. I have about 19 hours until the next round. I'm not sure if I'll be able to post this before the next round, but just be sure to check all the links in the video description. I'll leave links to the live broadcast on Lichess and chess.com, the official tournament website with pairings and standings, and of course my Twitch channel where Jonathan Trance has been doing commentary for my game so far. So do stay tuned for more recaps, and hopefully I'll be able to provide some happier results. But until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.